Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Corey Webb, and I'm a Marketing and Partnership Director here at TurnZero. And I'd like to welcome you to our webinar titled The Essential Mindset Shift of Effective CS Leadership. Before we get started today, I do want to remind everyone that we are recording today's session. I know we always get that question, so you're good to go. A link to the recording will be available tomorrow. We'll send those out via email. Throughout the presentation, you can submit your questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll address as many of those as we can at the end of this webinar. We also do have the chat enabled today, so feel free to engage with one another, but please do direct your questions to the Q&A, so it's just easier for us to grab from there. Now I'm pleased to introduce to you our speaker today. We have Rachel Provan. Rachel is the CEO and founder of Provan Success, where she teaches CS leaders to build and scale revenue-generating customer success departments without burnout, which based on today's registration, I can tell that this is something that is resonating with folks. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Rachel, to get things started.
Thank you so much, Corey. I always love working with you guys, and you let me nerd out on my psychology side. So I'm really glad that I get to do that today. I'm going to share with you some really useful stuff that is going to help you focus your mindset, focus your work, and just make it all a little bit more manageable. And before we do anything else, I do just want to acknowledge you for showing up today. You know, a lot of people don't understand the importance of mindset. They think it's fluff, that they can handle it themselves, but if you talk to anyone at the top of their field, they'll tell you that working on their mindset was the key differentiator in getting them to where they are today. Because your thoughts control your actions, and your actions determine your results. So congrats to all of you who decided to invest in themselves to spend their lunch hour or their morning or their evening, whatever it is for you here today. And let's see. And I know you could be doing anything else with your time right now, and you're choosing to spend it here. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank yourselves. And I'm going to go ahead and jump in. So as Corey said, in case you haven't met me before, I'm Rachel Provan. I teach practical solutions for CS strategy, team leadership, and mindset that are based in psychology so that you can create a revenue generating CS department that works in the real world without burning out. And my thought leadership has been featured in a few cool places. Calendly, Forrester's a new one, CS Insider, Gain, Grow, Retain, and of course, TurnZero. So here's what I've got planned for you today. I'm going to start with why mindset's important in the first place, just a little bit. Then we'll move on to the difference between the mindset of a CSM and a CS leader. We'll talk a little bit about imposter syndrome and executive presence. And from there, we'll talk about how to change your beliefs. And finally, why time management is in fact a mindset game. I'm also going to be sharing a resource at the end with worksheets that will be able to help you start putting the things we learned here today into action. Because, we've all been to a webinar and thought, wow, that was great. And then gone and done absolutely nothing different in our lives, right? So listening is step one, but knowing something and doing it are not the same thing. So this workbook gives you 3 simple exercises so you can start putting what I teach you today into your work in your everyday life. And it's free. It's just, there'll be a link at the end. So most people think leadership is about skills, learning how to give feedback, delegate, or build strategy. And those things matter. But if you don't shift your mindset first, you're going to struggle no matter how many skills you learn. The real challenge isn't learning leadership, it's unlearning the habits that made you a great individual contributor. So as an IC, your success comes from doing the work yourself. As a leader, success comes from guiding, influencing, and empowering others. And that requires a totally different way of thinking. It's one that most new leaders aren't prepared for. So without the right mindset, leadership can really feel impossible. You'll feel like you need to prove yourself by taking on more work, or you'll struggle to set boundaries and push back on unrealistic expectations. You might feel like an imposter, constantly second guessing your decisions. The good news is mindset can be learned. Now, there are 5 key elements that you need to become a respected CS leader, and I cover all of them in my program, CS Leadership Academy, but I only have about 40 minutes here today. So I'm going to walk you through a few highlights of my favorite one, which is, of course, the mindset pillar. And it's one of the most powerful ones. This is something that my students always walk away talking about in terms of how it changed not just their ability to lead, but how they conduct themselves in their entire lives. So by the end, you'll not only recognize what needs to change, but you'll know exactly how to start shifting your thinking. So let's dive in. So, what got you here won't necessarily make you successful here if you are in a CS leadership position. I'm sure we have plenty of CSMs on the line here, and none of this is to say anything negative. You're in a different position when you are an individual contributor. So when I say never saying no, I'm not saying to the customer. Obviously, you have to say no to the customer sometimes nicely. But what I'm really talking about is the idea of never saying no to your boss, to other departments. You kind of have to do what people give you. Focusing everything on the customer, doing everything yourself. That's your job. And a lot of us in CS do suffer from perfectionism and people pleasing. And I do mean suffer. Now, a CS leader mindset. Um, if you've ever had a great boss, you know, the kind that just got the best out of you, someone who made you want to follow them. I'm guessing it wasn't just because they were nice, although that helps. But for people to trust and follow you, you need to have confidence, clarity, be effective, have presence, and strong communication. Now, humans are pack animals. In order for someone to follow you, they have to trust that you know what you're doing. And if that genuine confidence isn't there, they can sense it. That's an essential survival mechanism. But you can improve this. Confidence doesn't just happen in one day, there are shortcuts to building it. There are also destroyers of leadership mindset, which almost everyone deals with. And those are imposter syndrome, perfectionism, and people pleasing. Every one of those elements undermines your leadership and prevents your employees from working their hardest and senior leadership from buying into the value of customer success. But again, the good news, they can all be improved. They're not who you are. They're just thoughts that have turned into beliefs, and they're exercises to change your beliefs. So we're jumping right in with imposter syndrome. Uh, this is not just about doubting yourself. It's a specific fear that you're secretly not good enough and everybody's going to find out. You are not an imposter. You actually don't know what you're doing yet. And that's okay because no one taught you. Thankfully, those around you do know that you're new at this. Unless you like lied on your resume or something, people know you're new. Or if you've just gotten promoted, they know you haven't been doing this for many years and they don't expect you to know everything and do everything perfectly. You know, and spoiler alert, I was a leader for over 15 years and I didn't always have the answer either. And if someone says they have all the answers, run. Now, executive presence. Lots of people get imposter syndrome and they're worried and connecting it somehow to executive presence. So I'm going to just call it out here and tell you executive presence is BS. It's just a fancy term for what confidence looks like on a 50-year-old white man. Now, I have no problem with 50-year-old white men. I happen to be married to one of them and love him very much. But if that's not you, and you try to act like this guy because you think that's what leadership looks like, you're going to end up looking like a weirdo. Technical term. What matters is authentic confidence. So here's why it matters. If you want people to follow you, have to be confident. As I said, people are pack animals. So let's take a second and look at wolves. Now, most people know that there's an alpha wolf, alpha dog, whatever, in a pack. And if the alpha goes down, the next most confident will take their place. Or if that's not clear, a few different wolves will kind of jockey for the position. But what's interesting is it isn't about ego. There's no one who's like, I want to be the leader. It's just, well, okay, somebody needs to know where we're going. And if none of you knuckleheads do, I guess it's me. So humans, also pack animals, we want someone at the helm who's comfortable and confident that they know what to do. Now, we all have micro expressions, a little eyebrow raise, a quick dart of the eyes, or the ears going back just ever so slightly. They're fast, they're millimeters. We don't register them consciously, but our body knows how to interpret them. Our brain does. You know if someone looks unsure or uncomfortable, or if something changes in their voice, and you register it. And if your team realizes, even subconsciously, that you don't feel confident, just like in wolves, they're going to start jockeying for that position so that the pack, your team, stays safe or employed. Now, what's important to know is, what does confidence look like on you? Now, this doesn't have to be extreme confidence, you know? Like, what if they told you, look, there's an important meeting tomorrow and you're going to be asked to discuss what is 2 plus 3? You're going to have the answer for that. Would you be stressed about it? I don't think so. It's just, okay, there may be questions. Okay, I got this. Like, I'm not concerned. That's the only level of confidence that you need. It doesn't have to be over the top. It's just, I got this. I'm not worried. So what if you do if you're not confident, right? That is probably more about limiting beliefs than facts. You don't have to know everything. You're allowed to say, let me go check on that. Let me look at that. Let me look it up. You're probably the one who knows the most about CS in most rooms. Just because someone has a higher position than you doesn't mean they know more about your specialty. You know, the CFO probably doesn't know a lot about CS. So leaders, all leaders are just, there's nothing special. They're just grown-ups in a room making educated guesses. But confidence comes down to a belief or a set of beliefs that you have about yourself. And I hate to break it to you, your beliefs are most often wrong. So here's how thought models work. You have a thought is not a fact. A thought is always an opinion, but it feels like a fact. So here's what happens. A circumstance triggers a thought, and that thought triggers a feeling. You take actions based on that feeling, not fact, and your results usually end up lining up with your original thought. So, for example, here in this thought model, you know, the person is thinking, people like me don't get promoted. And what your brain does is, oh, I lost my spot. Your results usually line up with your original thought. So your brain has to create shortcuts to process the trillions of pieces of data it gets every day. So it filters, it distorts, it deletes. And if a situation seems close enough to others that it has experienced, it will mark it as the same and delete any differences from your consciousness so you can go about your day. This is because the brain is focused on risk. Now, most of us lost our most confident selves somewhere around grade school or middle school. You'd show up just the way you were, and you'd suddenly get the very strong message that you, who you were, what you are, what you think, what you look like, is not enough. It's bad. And one of the things our brain recognizes for survival is that we need to be accepted by the group or risk death. This was the case when we were all cavemen and women, and the brain really hasn't changed all that much. So it considers acceptance by the group to be essential. So it builds up protective mechanisms to make sure you don't experience that feeling ever again. It's risky. Now, the main problem with that, of course, is that it's a lie. You know, typically the parts we suppress, the things that we were called out on in us, are where the good stuff is. It's what the stuff that makes us special, that makes us different, are our gifts to the world. But you can't reason your way out of a nervous system response. All this is happening in a fraction of a second. So what do? You take an action. So this is for, you know, people like me don't get promoted. The brain's going to seek confirmation of that thought. Every day, all day, it's seeking confirmation of that. Just as part of its operating system. All your beliefs, it continues reinforcing them. It picks out examples of things you already believe and saying, yep, see, I'm right, cool, we're safe. But the result, you take actions. So your brain has this thought, people like me don't get promoted. So your body tries to prevent you from feeling rejection. Because what happens if I try? I'm going to get rejected, right? Hate that feeling. Not going to let you do that. So your body then basically behind the scenes makes you lower your visibility. It's not going to cause you to do anything that might get you promoted. It's not going to make you more visible. You're not going to volunteer for stretch assignments or self advocacy because in your mind, there's really no point, right? So you lower your visibility, and then that belief becomes a reality. You don't get promoted, and now the thought has been proven true. So you stay stuck, but it feels like fate rather than choice, even though it was the behavior, even though that it was the belief that quietly shaped your behavior. So let's talk beliefs. A belief is just a thought you've had over and over, so much so that it's automatic. So if you think about the way water runs over a stone, over time, if it runs in the same place often enough, it will wear a pathway. Then it becomes even easier for water to run through there because there's now basically a chute that directs that water. It etches a path. The same thing happens in your brain. Our thoughts and our behaviors create what are called neural pathways in the brain. Otherwise, you'd have to consciously think through every single thing. You'd have to think through, okay, what do I have to do to brush my teeth? I have to pick up my right hand. Now I have to pick up the toothpaste. Now I have to unscrew it would be exhausting. Imagine trying to drive a car, right? So this is a good thing most of the time. But since your thoughts shape your beliefs and your beliefs shape your actions, you need to be able to have some control over these things and change them when you want to. Because if you're stuck in a repeating pattern that is not giving you the result you want to look at how you can change that. But let's be honest, you're probably not going to go from pure imposter syndrome, like I have no idea what I'm doing, to I'm the best CS leader in the world and everyone knows it. I don't care how many post-its you post up there or how many affirmations you say, it's too big a leap. So we're going to learn how to change our thoughts here. Now, the issue with affirmations, I love the idea of affirmations, even if I feel a little self-conscious about doing them. They can be effective, but the main issue is we make them too big. So let's say you have imposter syndrome and you believe you have no idea what you're doing. If you try and tell yourself, I'm a kick-ass CS leader and everyone knows it, your brain is going to go, excuse me, no, you're not. And now what you've actually done is reinforce the belief that you are not a kick-ass CS leader. And so the trick here is not to leap to the end goal of what you want to think. It's to think of the tiniest half step up towards that belief. That's still something that you can believe. And it often does have to be tiny. So let's say I'm starting out with, I have no idea what I'm doing. The first shift there might be, but I can learn. All right. It doesn't try to say you know anything yet. If you don't, it just opens that door to the fact that this can change, that there's something you can do about it. So you pick up a book or you take a course. From there, you can go to, I'm learning because you are. That's believable. And from there, it's not that much of a stretch to say, I know more than I used to. And after a little while, hey, I'm getting pretty good at this. And finally, you know what? I am a kick-ass CS leader. And, there may be more steps in there for you, or there may be fewer. But do you see how this feels so much more believable and how it gets such better results? So there are other ways to impact your thoughts, but just starting with this one can be so powerful. All that said, I'm not going to gaslight you all here and tell you that you're the only problem and that that's the reason you're struggling. In CS, imposter syndrome is especially common because success is not always clearly defined, and executive teams often don't truly fully understand our impact or what's required to create it. And as a result, we feel pressure to justify our existence, often by taking on too much, saying yes to everything, and avoiding hard conversations. But here's the kicker. The more we overwork and people please, the less we lead. True leadership does require confidence, strategic thinking, and boundaries. Those are all learnable skills. Now, one thing that you might think is a skill, but is actually a major mindset issue is time management. So when you first get made a CS leader, typically you're really excited to work on strategy and make a big impact in the business. But instead, you'll be tasked with all the random crap that no one wants to do and nobody knows what to do with, but they don't want to handle it themselves. And some of these you can see here, case studies for marketing, new feature release communications, demos for sales, because hey, you're better at it and we need new sales, upselling, webinars, customer advisory boards, collections. And that's when you're not answering Slack messages, emails in meetings, or handling escalations. This can feel like a time management issue, but the reality is time is fixed. It can't be managed. The problem is not how much there is to do, it's how much you say yes to. And most CS leaders I know are trying to fit 10 pounds of potatoes into a 5-pound bag. It just doesn't work. You have to make time to do your work at work. Your work has to come first. So what do we do here? We focus on what you can change. That's always the secret to any tricky situation, anything that feels really hard. You have to separate out what can you change from what is completely out of your control. And typically there's more in your control than initially seems possible. So here we're going to focus on what we can change. And the first thing here is the perception of CS. So the way we do some of that is prioritization, alignment with your boss, your schedule, and what you say yes to. Now, for the perception part, you have to start getting clear on what moves the needle on your KPIs and learning how to tie everything you do to revenue. And that's regardless of whether your KPIs are strictly NRR based. Even if you are what I would call an operational CSM who's tied to outcomes, you can still focus on, hey, we improved a process that saved, 20 minutes on average. 5 people do that in a day. So we're saving this much per month. You can always tie things back to revenue. But you cannot be the everything department. You can't succeed at miscellaneous. So one of my favorite tools is the Eisenhower matrix. And I like to use this list to sort through all the things that are on my plate. You just brain dump absolutely everything and you sort through the urgent and important. So you're just doing a line up with urgent, a line across with important, right? So the box that is urgent and important, do it now. That's going to be in your daily prioritization. However, where most people get this screwed up is urgent. Now, urgent does not always equal important, but a lot of times we feel like it does. Like if somebody's being really passionate about something, or they're talking really loud or saying this is really important, it's really important to them. Does it have to be really important to you? Is it going to affect your KPIs? That is worth looking at. And not urgent, but important, conventional wisdom here says schedule it. This is where most CS people fall off the radar, where they make their biggest mistake, which is they put it on their to-do list. They put strategy on their to-do list, or like improve onboarding process, something like that. But because it's not urgent and there are so many things that feel like they are urgent, the important keeps getting pushed off day to day, and maybe next week and maybe next month. And that's the part that actually improves your KPIs. That's your actual job as a leader, is to impact that strategic work. So when I say schedule, I mean schedule. I mean put it on your calendar, have it take up a good amount of your day, because wherever you move it, whenever you move it, you are causing yourself grief. You're going to end up with 6 months going by and them saying, well, what did you really do? This has happened to me. It's not fun. So you want to schedule it and do not move it. That's where a lot of people screw up too. You'll put time on your calendar and someone else will book something over it. You are not the one being rude in this situation if you say no. If you have something on your calendar and they book over it, you are entirely within your rights to say, I'm sorry, I'm not free at that time. Can you pick a slot where I'm free? Okay. From there, now you've identified what the important things are. You want to align with your boss. You don't want to just go to your boss and say, hey, there's too much on my plate, right? Because now you've dumped something else on their plate. A big thing about leaderships is that you need to come with solutions. So executives have top priorities. They prioritize revenue generating activities. So if you want to get some stuff off your plate, which you do, ask for a meeting to align on priorities. And you can say it like, as I understand it, increasing NRR is our first priority. Project X is what we need to work on if we want to do that, because here's how Project X impacts revenue, whatever. Great. So I'm prioritizing that. Usually the boss will say like, yes, that's still our priority. So I'm prioritizing that, but here's what's currently on my plate. And you can show, your project list or your calendar and explain, if I'm going to focus on X and increase NRR, I'm going to have to create time for that. And it means some of this is going to either need to go to someone else or it's going to need to go in a parking lot. Now, give ideas on which things can wait and why. Confirm it with your boss. 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, okay. If they want you to prioritize something else, just remind them how that will impact NRR, and do try and push back if they try and make it something miscellaneous, because you'll never get credit. And if NRR is really all you're measured on, if they want you to focus on something that's not going to impact that, ask to get your metrics and your team's metrics adjusted for the quarter, because otherwise you're going to end up chasing down other things and making people very happy with you and people pleasing them, but you're not going to hit your metrics and your team's not going to get their bonuses and they're not going to be happy about it. Now, how do we actually make time for this strategic work, right? I'm not telling you to block out your entire day. I'm aware of how hectic and crazy it is to be a CS leader. I'm saying start with 1 hour a day. Block off 1 hour a day, preferably in the morning, where you close Slack and email. This is not time to answer those things. This is not time to catch up on reactive work. Put your phone across the room. We're all addicted to it. It's a little dopamine heaven. Put it across the room. Whatever project that you are working on that you have decided is your strategy that is going to improve NRR, work on that for 1 hour with no distractions. Just the very next step in that project, just during this hour. Even if it seems like other things are more important, you have to attend to them. Again, this is an hour. When you prioritize the urgent over the important, that's what causes the lack of results. Now, it can feel scary to close your email in Slack for an hour. Discuss it with your boss, discuss it with your team, explain why you're doing it, but then actually do it. I know it all feels very important, but there's almost nothing in CS that cannot wait 1 hour. We are not surgeons. No one is going to die. An angry customer isn't going to churn because they didn't get a call back from a manager within an hour. Remember, 1 hour a day, one project per quarter. Make this a repeating appointment, Monday through Friday with no end date. And no, not your lunch hour. Please still eat lunch. You are entitled to do that. Do not let anyone schedule over it, and do not use it to catch up on anything. This is an appointment, like one with a client. Keep it. I even sometimes schedule it, or used to, when I wasn't working for myself. I'm a terrible boss. But I used to put it in my calendar as a meeting so that Slack would show I wasn't available and was in a meeting. And I also noticed people were less likely to book over things that were meetings rather than just something that says focus time. Because even you probably aren't going to feel motivated to work on focus time when everything feels like it's blowing up. So call it something like, strategic revenue, what did I call it? Strategic revenue planning session, right? So people probably aren't going to book over that. This is how you start making measurable progress on your CS department and your metrics every single day. And look, it is so much harder than it sounds. It is a mindset game. You're going to want to move it. You're going to want to cancel it. Examine the reasons that this seems like a good idea. And please don't let the great be the enemy of the good. Just because you canceled it once does not mean, okay, this doesn't work for me. I can't do it. Give yourself a little forgiveness, give yourself a little latitude, and then right back to it the next day. Now, for leadership, there's a hell of a lot that goes into one word. Organizational design, operations, your leadership style, setting strategy, presenting to executive leadership team or the board. But what I want to jump in here with are the biggest mistakes that I see new CS leaders make that often make them ineffective and can cost them their job. So the first one is assuming that you'll be a good leader. Now, just because you're good with people and care about them, that doesn't mean that you'll be a good leader. It could just mean that you've been people pleasing. And I say this from experience. Another one is that most people think leadership is something you're either born with or you're not. You either are a leader or you aren't. Wrong. They probably just haven't, they or you probably haven't taken the time to learn the skills necessary, and you haven't been given any guidance. All the skills around it sound really vague, so it can be hard to do that. But, if someone tells you to be more strategic, it's okay to say, could you tell me what results you're looking for? What would that look like in action? The third thing people get wrong most of the time, their first time, is micromanaging. If you've never been taught to be a leader, you're not going to know what you're supposed to do all day. So most of the time, people assume it's their job to make sure nothing falls through the cracks. So you double check everything, or you try to show that show your team the best way, aka your way, to do things. And I hate to break it to you, that is not helping. That's micromanaging. Now, on the other end of this, and the same person can be doing these same things, another thing people try and do is to be the cool boss, right? Now, what ineffective leaders do is they try and be friends with their employees and try and help them the way they would have liked to have been helped. But that is, again, making it about you and making people like you. And typically, this just ends up with your directives being really vague. So saying things like, oh, just get that to me when you have time, right? Because you don't want to put pressure on them. But then they're really not sure what the priority is. And then they end up not doing it at all because everything else feels urgent to them. And then you're going to end up being pissed when they don't do it at all. So what you end up with is being both vague and smothering, going back and forth. And you end up with a team that doesn't get their work done. They resent you, you resent them, and it's ineffective. It's not going to move your metrics. Just remember, folks, you're not being a jerk if you give someone parameters. If you say, like, I need this by Friday at noon, that's not being unnecessarily demanding. Clear is kind. And finally, one of the biggest traps is that people avoid giving negative feedback. And they're not really aware that they're doing this. Just keep thinking like, oh, it's not that big a deal. It was just once. It probably won't happen again. Then, yeah, I should probably talk to them about that, but they have a presentation today or they have an important client meeting today. I don't want to screw that up. I don't want to mess with their head. And then, well, now it's been a week, and these things just get pushed and then it feels awkward to bring it up. The longer you put it off, the worse it gets. The most people shy away from conflict because they just don't know how to do it. There are ways to have difficult conversations with people without making it an attack. It can be something that is constructive and something where you're not attacking them and saying like, hey, you did this thing. It can be more along the lines of, hey, I noticed XYZ. What happened? Because you're assuming good intent. That is really one of the best ways to go into giving negative feedback is assuming good intent and trying to find a better way for both of you. Let them help solve the problem. Um, One of the biggest consequences of not addressing things that require some feedback are you think it's just you that's getting bothered by this, but the entire rest of your team sees it. and it can make them lose respect for you, or it can make them feel like, well, why does he get to be a jerk and I have to work my butt off, right? So it can be a surprise to a lot of leaders when they finally address the elephant in the room with a problem employee and they see the rest of their team get better. A toxic employee can really drag a team down, or really just bad behavior. And finally, teaching versus coaching. Um, so teaching is kind of like what I'm doing right now. You are passively absorbing information. Coaching, which is what I do in my one-on-ones, would be less me talking at you. And this is what you should be doing with your direct reports. It's asking questions until the other person figures out the right answer for themselves. Because people are always going to buy in much more to an answer they've come up with themselves and remember it and act on it. Whereas if you just tell them something, and it's really tempting to do that. You know, even I fall in this trap sometime. You want to help the person out. You want to be the hero, you know, who's giving them the answer. They don't have to work for this. They don't have to toil like you did. Just here's the answer, like a little present. You have to take off your cape and let them find it themselves kindly by asking them questions. So this guy's, you know, teaching this guy to fish, that whole thing about, you know, teach a man to fish, he's for a lifetime. So instead of being like, here's how you fish, if you maybe showed someone before, saying, all right, well, how would you do it? You know, what do you think is different about the way you're doing it? What have you noticed? It's about asking the right questions. It's something that you can practice, even if you're not a leader at this point. Try seeing if you can get people to come to the right answer for them just by asking questions, getting curious, you know, maybe saying, well, what are our options here? All right, well, which do you think is the best one? What are the pros and cons? And finally, my favorite, well, what would you do if I weren't here? What would you go with? Okay, go with that. Uh, and finally, when you become a good leader, you finally realize that it's more about being a conductor than a one-man band. So I don't know if you've ever seen these guys. I live in New York City, so I see everything. But they look ridiculous, you know, trying to play every instrument at once. And the more important thing is they can't go for very long, right? Because that's exhausting and it doesn't command a lot of respect. Whereas being a conductor, you actually get those musical instruments to perform in harmony. The conductor does not need to go out there and play the tuba for someone. In fact, they can't conduct if they're out there playing someone's tuba. They have to be focused on getting everyone to work together to play to their strengths. And that's what you have to do as a leader. Not make sure everything's in its right place. It's just to guide people and guide their strengths. Now, mindset is the first step, but you also need a plan. So you've seen how shifting your mindset changes how you lead, but stepping into leadership isn't just about thinking differently. It's also about having the right strategies, frameworks, tools, and playbooks to succeed. The best CS leaders don't work harder. They have a system for success. So, as I mentioned before, I created a workbook for you to build on the things that you learned today so that you can start putting this in place in your everyday life. And it is part of the same approach I teach inside my program, CS Leadership Academy, which opens back up in April. And that does teach you those systems, the strategy, the leadership techniques, and more mindset so that you can build a revenue generating CS department. So if you do want to go ahead and grab that workbook, you can do that right below at the QR code. And if you want to learn more about the CS Leadership Academy, you can do that on my website at provansuccess.com. So thank you so much for joining me today. It's been really special to me to be able to share this with you. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Corey.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rachel. That was a great presentation, and we've had some folks send us some messages, kind of saying, yeah, I'm agreeing with what you're saying, and these things are hard, and I'm tripping up at this specific spot. So thank you for sharing that. Please do go ahead and submit your questions via the Q&A button, and we'll see how many we can get to. We do have a question that came in that says, how do you get more specific feedback from your manager regarding where future leadership and skills fit into an organization's vision when the feedback is usually vague?
Mm. Yeah, that is something where I'm reading through the lines here. It sounds like they don't have a very clear trajectory for promotions, right? And education.
Mhm.
I do actually have a program for that, which teaches you how to get that in place for yourself and how to get your boss to put that into place for you, even if your company doesn't have it. So you can DM me about that. But what I'll basically say to give you some useful answers here is if it's not already at the company, you do have to create it for yourself. So go ahead and look at what is it you would need to know to be in that next position. Look at a bunch of job applications that are up there or job postings. What are they asking for that role? And see how many of those things can I tick off and start making a plan for yourself to learn those things, whether it's from a book, whether it's from a mentor, whether it's from going to a webinar, you know, making that plan and showing how you are advancing your learning yourself rather than asking someone else, hey, you do this for me. That makes a big difference in showing that you are a leader and you can lead from wherever you are. Like you still need to do your individual contributor work, but if you show up influencing others in a positive way, helping others, and showing that you're taking charge of your career, that really makes the biggest difference because honestly, especially in this economy, everyone's penny pinching. It's not that they don't want to move you up, it's that they don't want to have to pay more. So you have to make a business case for why they should do that, why it's better for the company financially for you to be in that role. And it probably is if you have those capabilities, but you have to make that case for yourself.
Yeah. Thank you for those tips. I think that makes a lot of sense. We have another question that came in that's maybe the flip side of that. So, could you offer some suggestions on how you can get honest feedback from your team as a CS leader?
Mm. It can be tricky. That's something that's really, and I am very loud about the idea of psychological safety. It's not something you're going to get with one conversation. Everyone is absolutely terrified of being fired, especially right now, but really at all times. Um, and you've really got to show that it's safe to give feedback and that it will be received in a way that's like, okay, that can actually help me. You can ask your team, I would phrase it during your team meeting to say, like, hey, I give you guys feedback. This is a two-way street. If I can be managing you better, I don't have a user's manual for you. So if there's something I can be doing to get the best work out of you, please tell me. I am not a mind reader. And I will not take it personally or as a judgment. If there's anything I can do to help you perform your best, I want to know about it.
I like that approach. I think that would maybe get some honest feedback and make it, yeah, approachable for folks to give feedback there. We have another question that says, what advice do you have for a new CS leader who is the founding member of a startup and has to do everything and take care
Mhm.
of clients and design strategy and everything? What advice do you have for those type of new CS leaders in a startup?
That's how a lot of people become a leader for the first time is that they are the CS department. And that's why I kind of hate the title founding CSM. It's like, don't tell me they're not the head of the department. And if they're not running, if they're running the department and building it, that is the head of CS. So first of all, just know that you are in a leadership position. Balancing it all is important to look at what is everything on my plate. Um, is that realistic? I'm a huge fan of time tracking for myself, just to be like, how much time is this really taking? Because I know things always take so much longer than I expect them to. And often, especially in a younger company, that's because you don't have a lot of systems in place and you're going to have to jump to a bunch of different places to find the necessary information for a given client. So if the reality is that you need 45 minutes to prep for a client call, you have to factor that in. Um, but basically, it's just being honest with yourself about how much you can accomplish. And for the love of God, do that 1, 2 hours a day, even of strategic work, because you are going to just be completely reactive for a while. And that's okay. Like understanding when you are the department, you are going to be wearing many hats, but to
Mhm.
just gently remind them, like, hey, this is still the priority, right? Then I have to focus on this. I need to guard my time and do that. Like I want to help. I know we're all team players here. I just have to get this done first, you know?
Right, right, right. I think that makes sense. Let's see. I just want to remind everyone because I'm seeing a bunch of questions coming in, people saying they want the recording. This is being recorded. You will get a link tomorrow that you can watch yourself and share with your colleagues. So just know that is coming. Let's see. Our next question is, and maybe this is relatable for folks, what to do to not lose momentum on those baby steps? The problem is that somewhere in the middle of those baby steps, something happens and derails the plans and disappointment kicks in when I see how far I am from my end goal, and even this little thing doesn't go well, I give up and on the baby steps.
Hmm.
Any
No, I
advice
get
there?
it. I get it. It's really easy to get knocked off course and then not want to get back on. Boy, do I feel that. When that is happening, I would do something called temptation bundling.
Mhm.
Um, and this is where, because you're not going to want to do that activity, right? Like it's failed you, you failed it, drama, drama. Bundle it with something you like. So like I hate doing the dishes, so I bundle it with my favorite podcast. So if you really don't want to do this focus hour and you really don't want to focus, do this project, tell yourself you can try a Pomodoro where you only have to work on it for 25 minutes and that's it. And whatever you get, even if it's junk, it's fine. It's just the act of working on it. And then after that, you get a reward. And whether that's 5 minutes on, playing around on your phone, or like me, if it's Swedish fish, you get a reward tied to that. And it starts to become like, okay, I don't want to do this, but at least I get my fish. It really does work.
Like that. Let's see, so many questions coming in. Let's see. I understand the concept around coaching, but I find with myself, if someone says, "What do you think?" It's sometimes overwhelming and I don't know what I should do. And am I looking for them to explain why a decision makes sense and explaining their process? Is there a certain level of knowledge your employee should have prior to the blanket? What do you think?
Yes. Uh, if an employee comes in with no skills and you're like, what do you think? That's probably not fair, right? Employees need training. And if they have not been trained, you need to get them some or you need to do it yourself. What I really like to have in terms of career development is having people who have different levels of experience on the team, if possible. There always should be someone really experienced, and there always should be some new blood. And the more experienced one, if there's someone who does want leadership experience, I would say like, can you take this person under your wing, have them shadow you for 2 weeks, kind of show them the ropes? This will give you leadership experience to put on your resume. Now, I know it's scary to say resume to like your top performer, but guess what? They're thinking it anyway. So no one stays in one job for a long time. Showing that you have their back in that way, and that you're thinking about their development, it's not like, ugh, now I have to deal with this newbie. It's like, oh, they see me as a leader. So that's one way I would do that. But don't, it's not fair to expect people to come in if you know they don't have the knowledge, but you need to hire for what you need. Like if you are hiring 3 people who don't know how to do any of this just because they're cheap, you need to pay for some training. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to do your job. They're not going to be able to do their jobs. Um, I really like Anika Zubair's CSM Rev Up. That's a really good one for newer CS leaders to learn the revenue perspective. And I'm a really big fan of having all new CSMs read, what is it? The CS Professional's Handbook. That one is really tactical and practical. It's not a lot of fluff and theory. Like there are a ton of great books out there that get you to think about the idea of it. It's like, no, here's what you do. So I like that for them. Um, but yeah, for a while you will have to tell them what to do. What I also like to do is say like, all right, let's go with what you know. And what you don't know, you're allowed to ask me. You're allowed to say like, I don't know how to do this. There's a difference between someone not knowing how to do something and wanting a security blanket.
Yeah,
And my other rule is don't come to me with something you can Google.
fair. Yeah. No, I think you gave some really good advice there, and also thanks for sharing some of the resources too.
Well, yeah, of course.
Um, our next question is, I'm a CS leader and my whole team wants a promotion. How
Of
can I
course.
coach to keep them motivated so when we're ready, so are they?
I love this. And this is something that I teach in a lot more detail. But basically, the idea is I always encourage everyone to have one-on-ones with their teammates and ask, like, what are your career goals? And then kind of do the opposite of what I told that person earlier who wanted career advancement. Be like, okay, so what are you looking for? All right, why don't you go and make a list of everything that you think you need to do that? Bring it to me. I will fill in blanks, right? But this way you're not having to do the whole thing.
Hmm.
I will fill in the blanks and then you can go out and start learning those things. And if I see an example for you to get experience with any of those things, I will be happy to put it on your plate, walk you through it, delegate it to you, and, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you'll get a chance to start working with that. And that way you can put that on your resume. Hopefully I can promote you here, but I don't want to, stop your advancement because who knows when that will be, right? Believe me, I want to keep you, but I want to make sure that you get as much knowledge and advancement here as you possibly can. And that's one thing I can promise you, that I will get you ready so that when you do have all those skills, you're able to get it.
Yeah. Um, I'm sure that's something that a lot of CS leaders are probably dealing with. So I like
And
that
they take a
advice.
lot of work off your plate too when you do it that way. When it's like this is about leveling you up. It really does work out well. And it's okay. People are gonna graduate you. And it sucks, but it's better to leverage that fact and make everyone happier. I've had people stay longer because they're like, I knew I probably wasn't gonna get that opportunity again. So I wanted to learn everything I could and get everything on my resume that I could while I was still with you.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, ironically, sometimes they stay longer. And it
That's a
also
very,
helps
very
in
good point.
recruiting, like word gets around that you do that. And people are like,
Mm.
I want to work for you.
That's a great point. Um, what would you say are some of the biggest mindset traps for a new CS leader coming from a CSM background?
Yeah, it's still staying stuck in the weeds instead
Mm.
of getting that overall perspective. And that especially happens if you're in a player coach role. Hate player coach for CS happens all the time. I coach people on how to get out of that because it really isn't the best thing for the business. Um, Financially, it's a bad decision, and that's how we get them out of it. But again, what I would do there is time track, look at where your time is going. I have something where I have people fill out whether they're doing $10 an hour tasks, $100 an hour tasks, or $500 an hour tasks.
Mm.
And where you're doing the $10 an hour tasks, you have to ask yourself, like, could someone else do this? Like, am I really spending the time where I need to be? Um, you're also just not going to be able to get the perspective on what's going on with the overall customer base if you're focused on your own. And you're never going to be in the position to ignore your customers to do the kind of strategic work you have to do. um, if you're still in the weeds with them. But it's going to be tempting to stay in those weeds. It's a lot of the things I talked about here today. Um, wanting to know where every account is, like what's the probability on this renewal? Have you talked to them? Have you did that is not a good way to lead because your team needs to know how to do their job. If you have to be on their back for every single thing, you're going to be exhausted and they're not going to do their best. Go with their results and, let them know I'm not going to micromanage you. I assume you know how to do your job. If you don't know how to do something, please tell me and I will happily tell you how to do it. I'm always here to support you. I'm here to remove blockers, but I'm not here to like be over your shoulder on everything. Now, if there's something where it's like, oh, we're going to get a bad result here, come to me. I'll see if I can help. Maybe not. But that tends to be a lot easier than trying to stay on top of everything. It's scary because now you're not controlling every single little thing, but guess what? You never could. So give that a
Sure.
shot.
Perfect. We have one that just came in and says, I hear you on your point on player coach. And then
Mm.
they ask, what are your thoughts on CS leaders keeping one customer account so they are fresh on the product and business?
No.
No.
I mean, like, again, that's just going to skew your viewpoint, right? Because you're going to think that one client is representative of a lot more than they actually
Mm,
are. That's just how the brain works. Like, I like the theory, but the actual practice, and it keeps you in that CSM role. Like, it just doesn't make sense. You need to listen to your team and trust your team. That's why, in like weekly team meetings, you want to hear feedback from your team. You want to hear like, what are the customers saying? Let's share that with each other and listen to them. They're the boots on the ground, but you're going to get a much better view of what's actually going on if you listen to the people on the front lines. They're trying to tell you. Um, and yeah, like listen to a gong call here and there, ask people to submit their best gong call and one where they could really use some advice on like how the heck should I have handled that because that did not go the way I wanted it to. And that way they get to pick and you get a sense of how they're doing and what's going on with the customers. But generally, I'm a big fan of trust your team.
yeah, I think that makes sense. I like that approach to it. Let's see. When you're a CS leader and trying to make room for strategic work, but keep firefighting pulling you back in, what do you suggest?
That's where that 1 hour block really comes in and
Yeah.
it's keeping it sacred. But the most important point is the turning off your like literally close the email
Mm.
browser. If you see that little one in there or two, like, I don't know about you, that completely throws me off my game. I'm like, but what is it? Is it something bad? Did I win the lottery? Can I stop this right now? It's going to distract you. It's designed to distract you. Our phones, our computers are designed to drag us in. Every app is designed to drag you in as much as possible. So your email inbox and your Slack, those are other people's to-do lists that they are trying to get you to do for them. So close them. It's 1 hour. It's also okay if you're like, this work is not as fun as I thought it was going to be. It kind of sucks. Um, what happens most of the time, I think, and where people get resistant is it's something that you haven't done before. You don't know how to do it. It's big, it's overwhelming. Um, there are certain AI tools, but like you could use ChatGPT. Um, anything that you're trying to do, you can just put in there like, hey, I'm trying to revamp my onboarding strategy so that we can take it, so we can reduce time to first value by 30%. Here's our situation. Break it down for me in a week by week plan and then just do what it says on that week. And if it needs to be broken down further, break it down further. There's
Mhm.
a thing called goblin.tools, and it's free. And there's a thing in there that just does that for you. And if you're like, this step's a little too vague, a little too big, it will break it down for you further. Because for me, it's a lot easier to have to focus on a task and just be like, all right, so I have to look up these 4 things and take notes. I can do that. Then be like, fix entire onboarding system. Where do I start?
Yeah.
And leave breadcrumbs for yourself from the next day, for the next day. Just like I finished here, this is what I was
Mm.
going to do next, and then it'll be easier to pick back up.
Oh my gosh, so much great advice. Thank you so much, Rachel. I want to remind you again, we are recording this. We'll send this out tomorrow to everyone. At the end of this webcast, you will see a survey pop up. We'd appreciate if you would just take a minute to provide your feedback before logging off. I would appreciate that. Rachel would appreciate that. And thank you everyone for joining us, and have a great rest of your day. And we'll see you next time. Thanks everyone. Thanks again, Rachel.
Bye.
Bye.